Evening, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. Here we are with episode 70 of Sword of Spirit / Sermonator. You know, as I told you, when we finish up a teaching, a message, or a treatment, we go and take a little break and then begin that prayer time, find out what's next. And after a pretty exhaustive treatment of what we went over the past 3 or 4 weeks, I got what I thought was a strange direction. And it turns out that the pattern of what's going on here and where we're going is incredibly rock solid. I was sent over to 2 Kings. Now, who really reads Kings and Chronicles? It's really a history, all right, step-by-step history of the major highlights and lowlights, of kings. And just like the book of Judges is the same thing. It's history, and it was well-tracked. And so I started to read it, and I went through. And I thought, oh, okay, let's see where this really goes. So I did that, and I gave it a quick read. And I'm going to do that here, too. Just a quick read, not every sentence. But just, here we go. We go from the birth of one king to the death of another king, and then he comes here, the spiritual evaluation of Joash, who's a king. In the 7th year of Jehu, Joash began to reign, and for 40 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Jezebel of Beersheba. And Joash did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, but there were still things, the high places were still being kept, and there was a spiritual situation going on there where they were supposed to be repairing and upgrading the temple, but the elite class was peeling off the top, never got to do anything. Joash changes it all around. He gets threatened by the king of Syria, hands over some ornamentation, and just like Julius Caesar, gets killed by his peers and his underlings. So you figure, okay, this is just, a story to tell. There's many lessons to be learned from it, but it was at that point that I went back and did what, I normally do, and it's just to tear this down and see what's really going on here and why, okay? And I think you're going to be more than a little intrigued and surprised, maybe, but not really. But it really brings us back to this whole issue of the inheritance and the bloodlines of the Messiah. So let's start in chapter 12 of 2 Kings, okay? In the 7th year of Jehu. Now, we know who Jehu was, remember? He slew Ahab, and the eunuchs threw Jezebel off the ledge, and the dogs ate her, left nothing but her bones of her hands and feet. And it says Joash and Jehoash is the same, began to reign. And 40 years reigned he in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jezebel of Beersheba. Joash. Who's Joash? Well, remember, Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah. Now, we've spoken of this many times, but he brought it back here because I know that he wants us to see something as it was then as a precursor, all right, a foreknowledge of what would happen in the future, which did happen. So, Joash, Athaliah was Jezebel's daughter, and she killed all of her children and everybody in the court, okay? She became a regnant queen or regnant monarch. Regnant means that she's solely the ruler. There was no king, just her, a queen, whose mother had illegitimately captured the throne with Ahab. People talk about Jezebel, and that spirit is the spirit we've talked about from the garden to the end of Revelation. But she had children too, and Athaliah was worse even than her mother. Worse. Killed her own brothers and sisters and her own children, except for Joash. His aunt saved him. He was a little guy, all right? And immediately he was set in to be king. And Athaliah went nuts, went berserk, tried everything in the book, but it didn't happen. And it wasn't so much that Joash could do much about it. He was a little guy. But Athaliah sure feared the people that orchestrated his elusiveness or his escape of her. Now remember, this is the bloodline that leads to the Messiah. Remember what Joash means? God hath made himself a man. Now it's a very interesting double entendre, okay? I believe that's the right terminology. And two true statements. One is God hath made himself a man, meaning he made a man for himself in Yeshua, all right? Took the word, made it flesh, and there you got Jesus, all right? So he made himself a man. But it also can be taken as though he made himself a man, which is also true because that man, Jesus in the flesh, was carved and created from God's own word. So by making him, he made him exactly who he is. Made himself. So they're both true statements, and this is remarkable because Joash now becomes the king, okay? And listen to what it says in verse 2. Jehoash did that which was right in the sight of the Lord all his days, wherein Jehoiada the priest instructed him. So he took advice. He did right. He did all the right things, all right, that he was supposed to do. And he made it happen. And it's said for all his life. But in verse 3 it says, but the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places. Now, what do we mean when we talk about the high places? The high places were places of idol worship, okay, where they would quietly erect poles or little altars, if you will, and pray to these gods, these natural gods, the god of the forest, the god of all the Baalim, all right? It was paganism. And it says they still did this. The people were sneaking away and worshiping another god. And I guess they figured God didn't know. So a spiritual situation arose, when Joash was there as king. And it said that Joash said to the priests that all the money of the dedicated things that is brought into the house of the Lord, that is the temple, even the money of everyone that passes the account, the money that every man is set at, and all the money that comes into any man's heart to bring into the house of the Lord. In other words, they had collections, they had some out of the heart, which was, donations, whatever it was that they were collecting, he said, let the priests take it to them, every man of his acquaintance, and let them repair the breaches of the house, wheresoever any breach shall be found. In other words, take care of the temple, okay? it was in disrepair. Obviously, it needed some work, it needed some help, and he was counting on them to do that. Okay? Counting on them. And we're going to see, kind of what really happened here. Okay. What is a high place? Well, let's take a look at, really quickly, Numbers chapter 33 and verse 52. Numbers 33, verse 52. I'm almost there. Okay. It says, "Then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and destroy all their pictures, all their molten images, and quite pluck down all their high places." High places were typically like a high place where they would erect these things, okay? In Isaiah chapter 16, verse 12, let's take a quick peek there. Isaiah chapter 16, verse 12 says, "And it shall come to pass, when it is seen that Moab is weary on the high place, that he shall come to his sanctuary to pray, but he shall not prevail." Now let me explain. Jerusalem and the temple is on a high place on the mount, the Temple Mount. And we know that. All these other little structures, competing gods, all right, illicit in the lower places, but still called a high place. They would try to put them up on hills and this and that, things like that nature. But what they were shrines to the goddess, or Baal, even worse. Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 35. Here we go. "And they built the high places," right, "of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and daughters to pass through the fire unto Molech, which I commanded them not, neither came it into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin." Right back to Jezebel and her form of abortion. These babies would be born, take them right from the mother, throw them into the fire to Moloch as a sacrifice, let them scream bloody murder, all right? This was Athaliah's mother, Jezebel. So you see, these high places, not good, not good. And this whole story goes right all the way back there, okay? All the way back. Even King Solomon messed up. The wisest of all men, so they say, okay? He set up temples, and he built the temple, but he also established little temples for idolaters that were in the high places, all right? And to pacify his 40 wives. In 1 Kings 11:11, we see a bit of that. Just one book prior to where our study is tonight. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 11. Hold on a second. Almost there. "Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, Forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant." He did that because Solomon fell and did this to appease his 40 wives, all right? And, you can't worship two gods here, okay? So this goes all the way back, And it touches upon everything prior. So now God is saying, I want you guys to remember, we've talked about Athaliah, and we talked about Joash, but all we ever talked about was what his name really meant, and we didn't go further. Only that is, he became the king, and his mother went nuts, and we kind of left it off at that, and we mentioned that again tonight. But I got at another purpose here, and we're going to move through this. In verse 6, it says, "But it was so that in the 23rd year of King Joash, that the priests had not repaired the breaches of the house." What did they do with the dough? So that King Joash called for Jehoiada the priest and the other priests and said unto them, "Why didn't you repair the breaches of the house? Now therefore receive no more money of your acquaintance, but deliver it unto the breaches of the house." Now he made it an order, okay? These guys were robbing them blind. No more of your acquaintance. They're basically laundering money, taking money, making money instead of repairing the temple. They were pocketing this stuff. It wasn't, not much different than the Messiah when he saw them merchandising outside the temple. He swept everything off. He says, "You guys are crazy. This is Sabbath. You're not merchandising here." Right in the temple, right in the outer court. People thought he was wrong for that. He was right on. It's the same thing. These guys are stealing, okay? These are the temple priests, okay? So let's go on. He says in verse 8, "And the priests consented." They consented. Consented, all right? Order of the king. Consented to receive no more money of the people, and neither to repair the breaches of the house. But Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in the lid of it and set it on the altar, beside the altar, on the right side, as one comes into the house of the Lord. And the priests that kept the door put all the money that was brought into the house of the Lord right in the box. Now in verse 10, it says, "And it was so, when they saw that there was much money in the chest, that the king's scribe and the high priest came up, and they put up in bags and told the money that was found in the house of the Lord." They counted it. "And they gave the money, being told, into the hands of them that did the work." They didn't pass it through the priest anymore. He's saying, forget about it. You guys are crooks. They went right, cut out the middleman, all right, the payola. They went right to the workers that were going to perform it, all right, and those that had oversight of the house of the Lord. "And they laid it out to the carpenters and the builders that wrought upon the house of the Lord, to the masons and the hewers of stone, and to buy timber and hewed stone to repair the breaches of the house, and for all that was laid out for the house to fix it." So Joash did right in the sight of the Lord, despite this little elite priestly bureaucracy, even then, saying, "Yeah, we're going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it," like a lying politician. They get rich. This is nothing new. What you're seeing today in the news and hearing every day, it's not new. It went on here thousands of years ago. We're reading it to you as it was scribed by the Hebrew scribe. Okay. So verse 13, "Howbeit there were not made for the house of the Lord bowls of silver and snuffers and basins and trumpets and any vessels of gold or vessels of silver of the money that was brought into the houses of the Lord." It says, "But they gave it to the workmen," okay, "and repaired therewith the house of the Lord." He used, in other words, they were valuing more the things inside the temple than they were the temple, okay? Get it? "But he gave it away unto them." He said, "Moreover, they reckoned not with the men into whose hand they delivered the money to be bestowed on the workmen, for they dealt faithfully." In other words, the workmen did what was right. Honest day's pay for an honest day's wage. In verse 16, it says, "The trespass money And the sin money was not brought into the house of the Lord, but it was given to the priests. Here's your cut. Now go your way. So now we have yet some more stuff going on. Much more. We went through the spiritual situation, and now we're going to talk about the political situation under Joash. In verse 17 it says, Then Hazael, king of Syria, went up and fought against Gath and took it. And Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem to conquer there. Joash, king of Judah, took all the hallowed things that Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own hallowed things, his own things he gave, and all the gold that was found in the treasures of the house of the Lord and in the king's house, and he sent it to Hazael, the king of Syria, and he went away from Jerusalem. He paid him off. Paid him off. Said, here, take it. Take it. We don't need it. Hazael, okay? Interesting name. One who God sees, or one that God is seeing. And he saw what was going on, all right. The king of Syria. So here's what happens. Those same little rich elite guys that were robbing the temple blind witnessed this, and here's what they do in verse 19. And the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Well, they're in more detail here, actually. And his servants arose and made a conspiracy and slew Joash in the house of Millo, which goes down to Silla. For Josachar, the son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, smote him, and he died. And they buried him with his fathers in the city of David. And Amaziah, his son, reigned in his stead. Well, I guess he must have felt really secure. This is what they did. You know why? Because they felt entitled to all those possessions that he gave away. They made it like what? Like it was an act of cowardice? No. He not only saved the treasures, he saved lives. So he gave his life, knowing full well that this probably would happen, because this evil bunch is exactly what they were. Thieves, villains, scoundrels. Julius Caesar wasn't the first one to get whacked. King Joash, a king who did all right in God's sight, but not man. See, he stood against man. He says, the heck with your treasures. I got lives to save here. They made a conspiracy. History is nothing. There would be no history if there weren't conspiracies. There would be no need for the name or the discipline at all. Conspiracy is no more than two people deciding together to do something, good, bad, or indifferent. It's a conspiracy. But here's some unique things that we want to take a look at. Let's take a look at these names of the people that actually killed Joash. These were elites. Okay? You've heard that term. Killers of the innocent. Josachar, Shimeath, Jehozabad, and Shomer. This is what their names mean from bottom to top in translation in Aramaic and Hebrew. The guardian, the watchman, the watchkeeper was supposed to watch the Lord's dowry, because they that obey perdition, from they who obey perdition. But God has remembered. So here he says that you men who were supposed to be the watchmen, shomer, of the temple, and to watch over the Lord's dowry. That's referred to as the dowry of the Lord in many places in Scripture. But you obeyed perdition. All right? God remembers. These are the same guys that killed Joash because he gave up those items. He says, you were supposed to watch over this. You were supposed to take care of the temple. All these things that you did that you didn't do, and now you killed Joash. God hath made himself a man. But the line continued because his son, Amaziah, became king. And Amaziah means strength of the Lord. Notice how the names evolve. Joash, God has made himself a man. His son, by the strength of the Lord. And this goes on throughout the whole Bible, so I'm trying to get you to understand and to recognize what's going on here, okay? And how it happens. It's amazing. So here we have a full-on plot to kill the king by the guys that were supposed to be taking care of the temple, all right, who were pocketing the money for years. And this is what we see right here, okay? You know, I got to tell you, it's amazing when these things come out, all right? And it's amazing the timing of when I'm instructed to teach this stuff and how we move through these things. And we see how Joash was a precursor of the Messiah. Remember, he was betrayed by the same temple elite, the priests. He was betrayed by them and the traitors in his own midst. And the same thing happened. They killed him. This is a picture. God hath made himself a man. Joash's name. It's a picture of what we will see in the future. You know, I saw a cute cartoon the other day online. One of our friends here sent it around, and it was a bookshelf, right? And on one side of that said history, and it was packed. No more space. On the other side, it said history repeated. Same thing. No more space. So what we see is God pointing out and keeping us mindful. Just like he took us on a hiatus. We didn't talk much about Joash or Jezebel a lot in the past month or so. But he brings us back and shows, let's pick up the story from last we knew. You knew his name and what it meant and who he became. But did you know he was a young boy and this is what happened and he did right and they killed him for doing right. So, you know, it's a foreshadowing of what we see throughout Scripture, throughout prophecy, and ultimately what concludes with the Messiah. Okay? Well, anyway, we're going to go ahead and get ready to take a break in about less than a minute. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about how these things happened and some things that are happening today and some greater understanding of some of the names and things that are going on. I'll share with you a couple of things that have come my way as well. Okay, so anyway, get ready for a little break and then we'll be back shortly and we'll knock off part 2 of episode 70.